How did the Battle of Worringen 1288 become the day the Low Countries broke free from imperial control? The campaign begins as Duke John of Brabant crosses the Meuse, challenging the ancient grip of the Archbishop of Cologne on the Rhine. This bold movement forces a centuries-old hierarchy to face the rising might of mercantile wealth and territorial ambition. This sudden shift in power turns a local inheritance dispute into a war for the future of Northern Europe. Why did the death of a childless duchess in 1283 set the Rhineland ablaze? The extinction of the House of Limburg creates a legal vacuum that the ambitious Duke John I of Brabant intends to fill with cold steel. He secures the rights to the territory through a strategic purchase, bypassing traditional feudal loyalties to expand his sovereign borders toward the Rhine. This aggressive expansionism forces the neighboring lords to choose between Brabantian hegemony and the Archbishop's iron-fisted rule. How does Duke John of Brabant turn a legal claim into a military reality? He mobilizes his armored knights and secures the logistics of a long-term campaign, knowing that the electorate of Cologne will never permit a secular power to dominate the river trade. The Duke avoids static defense, instead launching frequent raids that ravage the lands of his enemies and bait them into a decisive field engagement. This relentless pressure forces the Archbishop to gather a massive coalition to protect his ecclesiastical jurisdiction. What makes the trade routes of the Via Regia worth a total war? The Duke of Brabant recognizes that the textile industry of Bruges and Brussels depends on free passage to the eastern markets, which are currently strangled by the Archbishop's tolls. By securing the Duchy of Limburg, John can dismantle the feudal choke points that drain the wealth of his burghers and merchants. This economic imperative transforms a dynastic squabble into a revolutionary struggle for mercantile sovereignty and open river transit. How do the citizens of Cologne decide to betray their own archbishop? The merchant families of the city see the rise of Brabant as an opportunity to break the clerical yoke that has restricted their municipal rights for generations. They provide John I with intelligence and supplies, effectively launching an armed rebellion against their spiritual and secular overlord, while the Archbishop's attention is fixed on the frontier. This internal betrayal strips the electorate of its most valuable garrison and financial heart. What forces the coalitions to abandon diplomacy for the field of Worringen? In May 1288, the arrival of the massive Luxembourg heavy cavalry under Count Henry VI shifts the balance of power and halts the scheduled peace talks. John I of Brabant realizes that further delay only allows his enemies to consolidate their superior numbers and fortify the riverbanks. This sudden escalation in military commitment ensures that the dispute over Limburg can only be settled by a massive blood toll. Why does the siege of Worringen Castle become the ultimate provocation? John I invests this episcopal fortress to threaten the Archbishop's primary toll station and force a reaction from the retreating Rhenish army. The sight of Brabantine banners flying so close to Cologne's northern gatehouse forces Archbishop Siegfried II to lead his troops out of Neuss to lift the siege. This strategic encirclement leaves the Archbishop with no choice but to commit his entire force to a risky open-field battle. How do 9,000 men prepare for the heat of June 5, 1288? The soldiers spend the morning of the Feast of St. Boniface, drawing up their battle lines on the dusty plain north of the castle. Duke John divides his force into 3 flexible squadrons, positioning his infantry and crossbowmen to support the initial charge of the knights. This structured deployment ensures that the Brabantian alliance can maintain its cohesion even as the midsummer sun begins to bake the armored combatants. What secret power does the massive Standardwagen provide to the Archbishop's line? This oxen-drawn fortress, bearing a massive crucifix and the banners of the electorate, serves as a sacred rallying point for the weary infantry and knights. The priests atop the wagon chant as the battle lines harden, offering spiritual authority to the secular steel of the heavy cavalry. This mobile command post provides a psychological anchor that prevents a sudden rout in the face of the initial Brabantian charge. How does the first charge of the Luxembourg heavy cavalry alter the course of history? Count Henry VI leads his armored knights in a thunderous shock assault intended to shatter the Brabantian center and end the war in a single afternoon. The sound of thousands of hooves on the dry earth signals the beginning of a melee that will last for 8 grueling hours. This initial impact tests the discipline of the Brabantine shield wall and forces the Duke to commit his personal reserves. Why does the duel between Duke John and Henry of Luxembourg end in tragedy? The two commanders meet in the middle of the crush, their swords clashing as they represent the competing visions of the Holy Roman Empire. Duke John the Firm manages to unhorse his rival, and in the ensuing chaos, Henry VI and his brothers are cut down by the Brabantine infantry. This catastrophic loss of leadership leaves the Cologne coalition without a primary strategist at the most critical moment of the fight. How does the stifling heat and rising dust create a blinding fog of war? The movement of thousands of horses kicks up clouds of dry Rhenish soil that obscure the banners and make it impossible for the commanders to see their own lines. Knights struggle to identify friend from foe as the air becomes thick and hot, leading to localized skirmishes where individual heraldry is the only guide. This atmospheric chaos prevents the Archbishop from coordinating a unified advance to exploit his superior numbers. What happens when the iron-clad knights lose their leaders in the melee? The Luxembourg cavalry, seeing their count's banner fall, begins to lose its forward momentum and drifts toward the riverbanks in confusion. Without a clear command structure, the heavy cavalry becomes vulnerable to the nimble Brabantine crossbowmen who target the horses from the flanks. This loss of cohesion turns a professional military force into a series of isolated units fighting a desperate battle for survival. How does Archbishop Siegfried attempt to snatch victory from the chaos? Witnessing the collapse of his allies, the Archbishop leads a bold personal advance that manages to push back the Berg militia and threaten the Brabantine baggage train. He believes that one final surge of ecclesiastical authority can break the morale of the rebellious burghers and restore order to the field. This desperate gamble puts the Archbishop himself in the thick of the combat, away from his tactical reserves. Why do the Archbishop's reserves hesitate at the most critical moment of the charge? Reginald of Guelders fails to commit his secondary cavalry line to support the Archbishop's breakthrough, fearing that the dust hides a hidden Brabantine counterattack. This hesitation creates a gap in the coalition's lines that Duke John the Firm is quick to exploit with his remaining knights. This failure of coordination turns a potential victory into a tactical disaster that leaves the Archbishop's center completely exposed to the enemy. How do the common footmen of Berg and Mark change the rules of chivalry? These men-at-arms, armed with pikes and driven by a desperate desire for freedom, launch a savage counterattack that ignores the traditional ransoming of noble prisoners. They focus on concrete mechanisms of victory, driving their spear points into the gaps of expensive plate armor as the exhausted Luxembourg knights struggle to maintain cohesion. This ruthless shift in tactics turns a noble skirmish into a slaughter that shatters the feudal elite. What allows the regrouped Cologne militia to break the elite shield wall? The citizens of the city, motivated by the promise of independence, charge the Archbishop's flank with a ferocity that catches the Rhenish knights by surprise. They swarm the heavy cavalry, pulling riders from their saddles and using their weight of numbers to overwhelm the disciplined formations of the electorate. This intervention by the urban class proves that motivated infantry can successfully challenge the dominant military units of the High Middle Ages. How does the destruction of the sacred oxen-drawn wagon signal the end? The Brabantine camp followers and servants swarm the exposed Standardwagen, hacking the banners to pieces and toppling the massive crucifix as the guards flee. The sight of their sacred rallying point being dismantled by commoners breaks the remaining spirit of the Archbishop's army. This symbolic defeat turns the retreat of the coalition into a general rout as the soldiers realize their cause is lost. Where do the fleeing knights find themselves as the Brabantian line closes in? The retreating forces of Guelders and Cologne are pushed toward the Rhine, where the marshy ground stalls their horses and leaves them trapped between the water and the enemy steel. Daniel van Bouchou captures Reginald of Guelders in the chaos, while Duke John personally takes Archbishop Siegfried prisoner to end the fighting. This final collapse of the Rhenish line ensures that the victory for Brabant is total and uncontested. Where does the dust of 1288 finally settle? The Archbishop moves his court to Bonn, while Cologne enters a new era of merchant-led sovereignty, and Adolf of Berg founds the city of Düsseldorf. This total victory secures the textile trade and defines the modern borders of the Low Countries for centuries to come. That deeper struggle with the papacy, the rise of regional counts, and the legends of this era will be the subject of another episode. Which next episode should we explore? The shift of power on the Rhine continues to echo through the centuries, and your support helps us uncover these forgotten moments of history. If this deep dive helped you understand the birth of the Low Countries, scan the QR code on screen to subscribe and continue the series. Your engagement ensures we can keep bringing these cinematic battles to life. Subscribe using the QR code visible on your screen.